It's Brian Preston, the money guy.
So let's move on to the next thing that I think the FIRE movement, as well as anybody who's considering making the transition from being saver to consumer/spender, is the number one factor that can destroy your FIRE goal.
Yeah, that number one factor we think is sequence of return risk. And if you go look out there in the blogosphere or the podcastosphere, and you look at all the folks who are this is the thing that they really want to camp on, and they really want to go deep and down and dirty on, right? Am I reading that correctly?
The way I'd put it is that when I started researching the FIRE movement and seeing what people are concerned about, what do they consider, what are they waking up, and they're going, oh my goodness, is there something hiding under the bed? Yeah. Is the boogeyman over there in that closet? They're talking about sequence of return risk. This is really, there's so many blog posts that are talking about sequence of return risk that I want to know, is this really the boogeyman, or is this something that it's something you just have to plan for and you can overcome?
So again, whenever we throw out a vocabulary word, let's talk about what the actual definition is. So when we ask what is sequence of return risk, it's the danger that the timing of withdrawals from a retirement account will have a negative impact on the overall rate of return available to the investor. Meaning, you start pulling out money at a really bad time, and it impacts your long-term sustainability in a negative way.
It's the exact opposite of dollar cost averaging.
That's right.
Because what you're worried about is that you retire, the market gets beaten up, your portfolio gets beaten up, and now you're starting to take some of that very important principle of your investment that will, it's a loss. Your army of dollar bills is being spent instead of being left to save and grow you in the future. So that's the biggest risk. So we did some research. I should say, with the help of Daniel, of course.
Of course, intern Daniel hooked this up.
And this was great. This was one of those things, and this is what I like about this, because I'm so excited to show this, is it is going to answer the age-old question of, is this going to be something that destroys your FIRE plan?
That's right.
And the answer is, it all depends on how well you plan. So let's go ahead and jump into the data and see what we did. And what did Daniel go and find for us, Bo?
Yeah, so if you remember, we've done a show a number of months, years, it kind of runs all together. We did like Bob, the worst investor ever. We looked at what happens if you invested at the worst time possible. We said, okay, well, what if Bob got done with his investing career? And then what if he retired at kind of the worst time possible? How does that look? And so we wanted to look at an illustration going from 1999 all the way through present day and said, what happens if someone retired at the beginning before the dot-com bubble?
Well, the reason we chose this time, though, is because Daniel, and when we were doing the show notes and prep as a team, he found over the last 60-year period, this is the worst time you could have retired from a sequence of return risk. And the reason is because think about it. Dot-com bubble of 2000. And then you recover, and you're like, whoo, glad we made it through that. 2003 was a good year. 2004, you poke around, and then all of a sudden, kabam, 2008 happens, and it pops you again, and you're like, oh
Holy
my goodness,
cow.
So this is what you have to prepare yourself. So over the last 60-year plus period, this was the worst period you could have retired if you're thinking about it from sequence of returns.
And so we looked at it as a 60-40 portfolio, and for the 60, we just used the S&P 500, and the 40, we just looked at the 10-year Treasury. And we said, what happens if we start with a retirement value of $2 million?
Yep.
And what happens if we want to live off of $100,000 a year?
5% withdrawal rate.
5% withdrawal rate. How does this play out in the real world if that's what our portfolio looks like?
Wow. A picture says 1,000 words, or maybe even 1,000,000 words. So I know we have a lot of podcast listeners. So I want to go ahead and I'll let Bo go into even greater detail. Sure. But the first thing that people are going to notice, because we have a line that's going down over time, that's you pulling money out of the portfolio. And by the way, this kind of idea did not come from just let's put this line going down. We know when we do our quarterly reports for clients, we actually show this for retirees. We show them what their principal amount that they invested with us, what the market value is. And I'm always amazed. I've even come into your office and I said, I can't believe this person's been pulling off his portfolio so long. Look, they don't really have any money invested anymore, but because their army of dollar bills kept growing, they still have a portfolio that's worth this much. So this is how this idea came to us, because you'll notice there's a slope line where the withdrawals are occurring, taking away principal from the portfolio, but yet you have the market value. But here's what's very troubling about this chart that Daniel created, is that right in those first 4 to 5 years that this portfolio was set up in retirement, you can see the market value is actually less
It
than
went
the
negative.
initial
Yeah.
investment. So you are consuming, when you're pulling money out, you're consuming your initial investment.
So I'm going to say that even differently. Not only is the portfolio losing value, you are pulling money out. So it is a double dip, a double whammy, a double ouch. That's the worst case scenario. You think about when I retire, I start pulling money out, and the market has a hiccup. That's not what you want.
So fast forward though, because this is I like it. It's kind of like a Disney movie. It
Yeah.
has a happy ending.
So okay, so before we go to the next illustration, what I think is really interesting here is this person, even though that happened, because they stayed the course, they didn't go to cash, they didn't freak out, they didn't pull all their money out. By the recovery of 2003, maybe 4-ish, even though they were pulling money out, their portfolio went positive. And then it actually made money from 2003 and 2004 all the way until the Great Recession. The Great Recession happened, but they still stayed in the black.
Yep.
Even though they were pulling money out, they had more portfolio value than they actually had money, corpus invested. So when they actually worked through, what is this, an 20-year period that we're looking
Yep.
at, they started their retirement with $2 million. They got to the end 20 years later, and their terminal value of the portfolio was $1.6 million.
So this is why I say it is a happy ending, is the fact that they invested $2 million.
right.
They even consumed some of that because just they got unlucky on when they retired. But yet the happy ending is that even though they have a full retirement of enjoying 5% withdrawal rates, which is pretty aggressive, they still ended up in the future at $1.6 million. I'd say that this is starting to look a lot like success.
That's exactly right.
Even though, and here's what you can also glean from this, doing this exercise. Because 2008 was substantially better from a market return standpoint than even 2000, 2001, 2002 was. But if you look at this, because they had from 2003 all the way to 2008 to have a recovery, 5 years, that's about the insulation you need so that your portfolio gets a running start to hit retirement.
That's exactly
Now,
right.
we structured this on purpose to break it and pull corpus out from the beginning. But I'm telling you, if you can just, even if you hit a bad time, you're going to be okay if you measure twice, cut once, and got that with that safe withdrawal rate right on the front end. So don't let sequence of return risk put you in a box where you think that just go blow up your retirement.
That's right. So this was the worst case, right? We said, well, what if, not everyone is going to get that? Let's just call it unlucky, because you can't control what the markets are going to do. What happens if we just change our time frame just a little bit? What's it like if we shift it? And so we said, okay, what if instead of retiring right before the dot-com bubble bursted, what happens if you made the decision to retire after the recovery kind of came back?
Yeah.
Right? So we said exact same illustration, but now you retire
Shifted it by 3 years
by
or so.
3 years, January 1st of 2003, exact same portfolio, exact same behavior. Nothing else changed except for the date of retirement. Well, now you start with $2 million, and 20 years later, as you move through your retirement, your value on January 1st of 2019 is $3.6 million.
Well, you see, the big part of this is because there's not a single time where the fair market value dipped below the initial investment.
exactly right.
Meaning your army of dollar bills was working very strong, really well. It was healthy. You had enough of a head start to let to let the money grow bigger than you're pulling out. But it is one of those things where this is, guys, when you retire, remember what I said when I gave the legal disclaimer at the beginning. I want anybody who's actually thinking about turning in the resignation letter and pivoting in their career to consider, doing a Monte Carlo simulation. Because
Absolutely.
what we just did was what the software is actually doing when they're running thousands upon thousands of illustrations, is we showed you the top 5%, we showed you the bottom 5%, and the reality of your retirement is probably going to be somewhere in between
exactly
that.
right.
But that's why if you can just do that measure twice, cut once, and plan ahead to make sure you have a reasonable safe withdrawal rate, you don't have to be fearful of sequence of return risk.
exactly right.
It is
That's-
something that totally can be planned for, accounted for, and driven through. So just make sure you do the hard work to make it a success.